Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the BILLYCAST. My name is Cooper Bibaud. I'm an actor, writer, and producer of film, television, and video games. This series is going to explore questions I've been asked about how to get into video games, how to make video games, and hopefully even answer questions that I had when I was thinking about doing it, as well as everything that came up along the way developing my first game. I noticed there wasn't a ton of available podcasts specifically for what I was trying to do, whereas in the film and television world, there's a billion podcasts for every individual craft. So I hope this helps someone out there who might be stuck like me or had questions like me or just needs a little help getting started. Now, I do plan on covering the entire development process from beginning to end, but I didn't want to record these episodes entirely chronologically for a multitude of reasons, one of which I just wanted to keep things fresh and exciting, and sometimes I just want to jump around and tackle a subject that you might be wondering. For instance, if you had more questions in the later half of development, I don't want to have to make you wait a long time to get there, so I may jump around. Overall, I'm going to stick to some kind of a loose outline, but every now and then I'm going to throw in some episodes that can be enjoyed sort of as one-offs like this week, and I will be in the future discussing certain events that happen for me in real time as well, because I'm not actually 100% done everything, and I thought it would be fun to start the podcast before I officially finished so that I could actually give you sort of week-to-week live updates on how I'm experiencing things when it comes to marketing, press kits, release, post-release, and that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to jump all over the place and really cover everything when it's all said and done. And hopefully whenever you discover this podcast, the part of it that you want to learn from the most will be available to you, and you can get started, and maybe you'll eventually go down the rabbit hole and learn a bunch of other things as well. Also, for people wondering, I will also eventually be doing very specific things. I know so far the topics have been somewhat vague, but I will eventually be doing topics that really narrow in on writing habits, design practices, and directing and that kind of stuff as well. I have a lot of episodes planned, so by the end of the series, I should have covered everything that you may be wondering, and if not, like I say at the end of every episode, there is a Patreon for this account, so if you would like me to cover a specific thing or answer specific questions that might pertain to you personally, let me know in the comments over at Patreon, and I can see about answering those as well for you. So I hope you enjoy. So without further ado, let's get to this week's question. What were the most surprising things about game development that you wish you knew? So I think before jumping right into the question, I should explain a bit more of my previous experience, which then bridged me to game development, which is my film background. So I had already made a feature-length film and was aware of the pipeline of pre-production, production, post-production when it came to the film industry, film and TV. And I had my hands involved in every facet of that as well. So I was well prepared when it came to the film industry. And so what I did was I actually didn't know anything about the making of video games technically. I mean, I knew as a player of them and someone who has been interested in the industry and has studied them my whole life, I knew probably more than the average person, but I had never had firsthand experience with making a game. I had never gone to any kind of game design school or even film school. I've always been self-taught. And so I decided that when I was going to make my video game, I would take this same approach with what worked in the film world and apply it to the video game world, because I thought they must be somewhat similar. I mean, there's going to be a planning stage, there's going to be the production stage, and then the post stage as well. And some developers will tell you that they have nothing in common. Some will tell you that they do. I personally think that they are very similar in some ways. But in other ways, they differ quite a bit. And so one of the first things I'll say about what surprised me the most about game development that I wish I knew was the minor differences in the pipeline. Now, I should say this as a caveat that this is probably due to poor planning on my part. And I'll get into this in a later episode, but my first game started off as a passion hobby type project, and so by the time it became more of an official real thing, it was too late to go back and do a proper design document and a real pre-production stage and planning. And so what ended up happening to me is I sort of felt like at one point I was doing every single type of phase, pre-production, production, and post-production type things all at the same time. Now, I'm not sure if that was due to poor planning or if that's really how it is. Parts of me think there's no real way to get around that because, let me explain this answer. So what I mean by that is there will be days where I will have to look at concept art still, even late into the game, because if we have to add or tweak or change something, there's a bit of planning in that, even if it's a quick little thing. So I'm still looking at concept art when we're close to finishing the game. And then the same day, I'm looking at press kit stuff, things that you're going to be doing for promotion. I'm looking at music and I'm okaying sound effects. I'm having to make design changes. So I'm still designing new parts of the game that the player will actually play. If we have to cut something, that means I'm going to have to do some rewrites. So all of these dominoes can fall in a way that in one day I'm looking at concept art, which would be like a pre-production thing. I'm looking at planning and then I'm designing and rewriting and I'm giving the final okay on other things and I'm looking at promotional material. So it's kind of like you're doing everything at once. In a movie, you don't really do that. You have set stages that are a lot more locked in place. When you're shooting a movie, you're no longer talking about set decorating. It's already been locked in place. Minor tweaks may happen, I don't know. Like script rewrites may happen on the fly if it's not on some shoots. But for the most part, you know what's going on. When the cameras roll, the sets are designed. They better be, or else they're going to have a horrific shoot. And then you don't start necessarily getting, if I'm talking independent here. I know bigger studios and things will start doing dailies and cut loose teasers and trailers while in production. But for an indie team, you can't spare the manpower really. So you're going to be shooting the movie, and then once you're done, that's when you're going to start editing things together. You're not really doing all that at the same time, at least in my experience. It's just too difficult. I just lack the resources to be able to have that type of experience happening. Whereas with the game, it's kind of like a flurry. It's just everything all at once. And I've been asked before, like, what's harder, making video games or making movies? And to me, they're different types of difficult. I still think making a movie from beginning to end, and this is again speaking as if you're taking a lot of the work on yourself. So if you're wearing lots of hats when it comes to making a movie and making games, I do think making film is not a lot more, but it's more difficult in that somehow it's physically exhausting. I think that's an aspect of filmmaking that people don't really talk about a lot, but if you're co-directing or if you're producing and you're also the editor and you're also one of the lead actors and you're the writer, like I am a lot of times, it's not just mentally taxing, it's physically exhausting. And plus you're shooting some days, could be a 12-hour day, which a lot of people don't think like, oh, you're just sitting on set, but you're kind of on, like your brain is on the entire time. Even if you're just sitting there eating a piece of celery, especially, like I said, if it's me and you have to do a quick rewrite or you're just thinking about your scene or you're preparing for the next thing, a 12-hour day, 5 days a week, or 6 days or 7 days, it gets very exhausting. It gets very tiring. So there's a physical drain to filmmaking that I think it doesn't happen to me, at least when it comes to game development, but I think game development is much more mentally taxing, and the amount of work far surpasses filmmaking, in my opinion. So when it comes to making a movie, it's a little bit easier to compartmentalize and just take things as they come. Whereas a video game, for me, it's just like so much stuff is thrown at you at once. And at any given day, you have just a monumental mountain of work awaiting you. And it can get daunting to look at when the mountain doesn't really seem to get any smaller. It just, if anything, it gets bigger and bigger. So on a day-to-day base, I think that video games present more tasks and more work, and film might present less, but the tasks themselves might require more from you. So overall, they're both equally impossible to do. They're both miracles. If you can actually finish a feature-length movie or a legitimate real video game, then I think you've done something special. But let's get right into the question here specifically. I want to give some specific examples here. So what were the most surprising things about game development that I wish I knew? The first one that comes to mind that I come to over and over again is the time it takes to do certain things when it comes to the programmers. So if you look at a game and you don't have a understanding about how games are made and coded and all that kind of stuff, and like I said, I usually focus on the creative aspects of my projects. So I'm writing, I'm designing, and that kind of stuff. I'm not doing the hard coding. But with my past experience and my general knowledge, I know kind of how long things, or at least I thought I did, how long things should take. And what I wish I knew was that, let's give a specific example with my game. So with Billy Saves the World, something that I would have thought when I started making my game, I would have assumed that making an entire user interface. So in our game, we have, for your inventory and your menu system, we have a smartphone. So when you press the start or menu button, your mobile phone, your smartphone kind of pops up on the screen. There's a nice little animation for it. You can see all your apps. You can navigate through your apps, and when you click on one, the phone does a nice little animation. It spins on the screen, and then it goes to full screen, and you can switch out from the apps, and every app looks very unique and colorful and different, and there's little animations and sounds. And for me, I would have thought that would take a long time. I would be like, okay, that's a major system in the game. It's a core system. That's going to be something that ties your entire game together. You're going to be using your inventory. You have to have little menus designed. I would assume that would take a lot of time to code and make sure it works correctly. But in reality, somehow, and I don't, still to this day, I don't understand it, but it doesn't take that long. We had a functioning menu system that could do basic things right away, but then when we implemented the smartphone system, it really only took a couple days, and then we did a major UI overhaul very recently where we had each individual app looked unique. So before, every app just opened up on the phone and every app kind of looked the same. We did an overhaul where every app had a unique look to it, a unique feel, a unique fonts and animations and that kind of thing, just to make it look more polished and professional. And again, I would have thought that would take a long time, but it really only took a week and a half. So like we don't work on weekends, but 7 days, seven and a half days. And it looks great. But, and I would have, at the beginning, I would have thought maybe that would take way longer than that. And then you look at something like we have this issue currently where some of our NPCs, when they're walking around or if they sit on the ground, their art, like the bottom of them, their feet, they're not actually touching the ground correctly where you walk. And for me, I would think, oh, that's just a simple little thing. Maybe it's just an art related thing where you just move the art down or you do something like that, or you would adjust something very minimal. But it's taken us months. It's something that's just never been fixed. It's something that has taken forever, and it's just it looks so minor, but it actually affects a lot of different things in the game for some reason, and everything is interconnected in a way that I can't quite explain. And so I think that's something I wish I knew ahead of time, was just a better understanding of how long certain tasks may take and how quickly some might take. Because from a directing standpoint and a producing standpoint, when I'm trying to assign tasks, work out a budget, work out a schedule, I was usually pretty good, but sometimes I was way off. Like in these cases where I would be like, okay, you can get this done today, blah, 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 blah. Little did I know that's going to take a month, right? And so it catches me by surprise, and I think that is useful knowledge for me to have now that I have a better understanding about how certain systems work, how long it might take to make a single enemy, even just a basic AI, a basic enemy. Having that knowledge behind me is going to significantly help me going forwards. A lot of work goes into creating a unique enemy and building their systems. Even a basic one, it can take quite a while. And so just having a better understanding about how long each thing can take, and obviously this varies from programmer to programmer and how many people you have in your team and that kind of stuff and engines you're using, but I'm still going to be able to use the knowledge I gained from making my first game and apply that to my next game. So that's definitely something I wish I knew ahead of time. It's going to help me budget time better and money and all that kind of stuff. So that is definitely something I wish I knew beforehand. Another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that, and something that took me a very long time to wrap my head around and even accept, because it's a very frustrating part of game development. And I think it's the thing that if the common person knew this, they would have a much better idea of why it's taking you so long to make your game. A lot of people will be asking you, like me, when is your game going to be out? Why is it taking so long? How are you still working on it? And I think if a lot of people understood what I'm about to say, they would be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to game development, and again, this is just from my personal viewpoint, my experience, it's not as linear, it's not very linear in the sense that you have a series of tasks and you complete them and put them in the game, and that's that. If you're making, let's use a very basic example of Pong, okay? And this is not how Pong was made, I'm just using it as an example. But let's say you have Pong. It's a simple game of a dot moving back and forth. You have paddles and you're bouncing a ball back and forth. Let's say on day one, you're thinking, okay, so let's get the art done. Let's get our paddles. We got the 2 lines. We got our dot. Cool. That's a lock. We got our art. Day 2, let's get the paddles moving up and down. So you spend all day getting the paddles to move up and down, and now you have this line that is able to go up and down, and on your side at least. The other side, the computer-controlled side, you're going to focus on the next day. The next day you come in and your lines are gone. The art has gone that you did, and you're like, oh, what happened there? Oh, something went weird when we put in the code for allowing you to move your paddle up and down. For some reason that removed the art, and you're like, oh, that's weird. So now you got to spend a day again getting the art back in. So now your 4th day, you got the art back in, and now because you put the art back in, your paddle doesn't move up and down, and you still haven't even gotten to the computer side yet. And you're thinking, okay, this is weird, and we must have a bug here. So then you spend a whole day tracking that down. Hopefully by day 6, you figured it out. Now you have your art piece, and the art piece is there, and it goes up and down. So now you can spend the next 2 days building the AI component on the other side. So the other paddle will move and compete with the player. By the end of that day, you have 2 paddles that are able to move, one controlled by a player, the other one controlled by the computer, and you have the art, and it's starting to look like Pong. You come in, it's day 7, day 8, who knows. You decide it's time to get that ball in there. Let's get the dot. We want to play this thing. We want to see how it is. So let's get the dot moving. Let's get the physics going so that the ball bounces around and we can actually play a game and see what it feels like. So by the end of that day, it's exciting. You're all like, wow, this is cool. We have it. It's working. We can actually move a paddle and we can bounce it. And when the ball bounces, it moves to the other side and the computer hits it back and we were able to play it somewhat. You come in the 9th day and you realize that when you put the ball in, the art was removed and the AI got removed from the right side of the paddle, and now the left side doesn't move down. When you press down, it only moves up. This is my example of how games are. It's never a linear experience of once something is complete, it's complete. Nothing is really ever complete. Every time you put something into the game, it risks everything else that you've done up into that point into breaking. And it's hard to wrap your head around. And sometimes it's very frustrating, especially coming from a creative standpoint. You're wondering why. We did that already. We've done that 500 times already. Why are we still working on that one thing? And it's because things just break. And one of my programmers gave me the best analogy for it, which is programming and game development is like a Rubik's Cube. It's every time you think you solve a side and you get one of the sides all blue, then you try to solve the next side, and then you look back and your blue side is all scrambled again. And it's the perfect analogy. It's every time you're messing with something and you're trying to solve something, it's changing the stuff that you've already done. So it's very different from, say, making a movie where once you shoot a scene, that scene's complete. It would be like shooting that scene and then the next day you show up and someone told you that the scene you shot, every 5 seconds it's black and the voice has disappeared and you got to reshoot the scene every day. So every time you shoot a new scene, your previous scene gets ruined. So by day 3, now you have 2 scenes that are ruined. You got to go back and do 3 scenes at the same time. So it's very weird. It's almost like every day you're doing all of the work again exponentially, because you get one thing done and it messes up two things, and you get three things done and it messes up two things, four things, three things, and it's this weird mountain of disgusting work that is very frustrating, and things just break all the time. And that's something I wish I knew going into things just on a mental level, because at first when I was not used to it, it was extremely frustrating. And in my head, I think I was almost taking that frustration out on my programmers, thinking that they were maybe dropping the ball, but they're not. That's just how it is. Sometimes it has nothing to do with what you're doing. You could insert a single sound effect, and for some reason now your menu system doesn't open up when you press start. It's constant troubleshooting and puzzle solving, and it's like you're always making everything all the time. And it's a very annoying part of game development. And it's not as crazy as I'm saying it, but it happens always. Like, it happens on a week-to-week basis. There's always usually at least a couple tasks that I have to reassign to someone because they're no longer working. So it's just a thing I've gotten used to, and I think knowing that ahead of time would have been easier for me to deal with and not be so stressed out like I was. At this point, it's still frustrating because it's annoying, but I at least have a mental grasp on it, and I'm able to reassess, and I almost foresee things happening now. I can almost tell what things might break due to other things, and I'm getting a much better understanding of everything. So it's a lot easier to deal with. But like I said, that's definitely something that I wish I knew, and it is good to know ahead of time, no matter what area you're working in, because it just helps you empathize and understand the work that other people are doing. Now, the third and final thing that I thought was surprising that I wish I knew, and there's probably more. These are just the ones that are coming to my mind right now, and I'll touch upon more, I'm sure, later on, as I'm still learning to this day. And I knew this going into it technically, but it still surprised me, which was I knew that games took a long time to make, but I knew that making movies also took a long time to make. So when I first started, I knew I was committing at least 2 or 3 years of my life to one project, and I even doubled it. I remember saying, I would be fine if it takes us 4 years to make this game. I know it's going to take a long time, but it's taken even longer than that, and part of it is because of the thing I just mentioned, which is I wasn't aware that things are changing constantly and breaking and having to be solved, and that really extends a lot of time into development, and you just learn as you go. You have to, and the best way for me to learn is by experience and by getting my hands dirty. It's how I made movies, and it's how I'm making video games now, and it's just something that you will learn and then luckily be able to put to practice in your next game. So my next game is going to be a lot more, I'll be a lot better prepared. I'll be able to manage it a lot better. I'll be able to have a faster turnaround time, and it'll be a bit more focused. I'll be able to use everything I've learned from this game, obviously, and apply it to the next game. And now I should say that these examples I've given so far are more directed at people that are going to be making a game regardless, whether it's going to be backed by a studio or publisher system or investment money, or doing things super indie style. So you will probably face these things no matter what way you go. However, I do have some in mind for a future episode that you might face if you're doing things super guerrilla style, where it's just you and your buddies and you're making a game and no one's getting any money. There are definitely different things that you're going to face in that style that I'll get to in a future episode. Also, I did think of another one while talking just now that I thought, why not get them all out here right away in this episode. So I do have one more. Technically, no, I have two more, because I want to end on a happier note rather than just laying a bunch of negative things out. So one bad, one good. So one last thing that did surprise me was how a simple idea like a 2D game that isn't high fidelity in graphics or anything, it can still be a very taxing experience on your engine and on the system that you're building for. I had a ill-conceived notion that, if you're picturing something like The Last of Us Part 2 running on the PlayStation 4, you're thinking, wow, that looks incredibly good. Thankfully, we're only doing a 2D game of Pong, So that means the system will be able to handle it really well, since it can handle The Last of Us Part 2. That's not how things work at all. Engines are completely differently. Every team has different ways of doing that, and that's how you program different bits of code to help things run better, and understanding the system architecture and all that kind of stuff. So you will still run into problems even when you're creating a very simple game. Our game is a 2D game. It doesn't have that many graphical spectacles, and there are still things where it's like, oh, this is bogging the system down just because we have some lights over here, or this is bogging this down just because we have a couple frames of animation over here. So there's still things that you have to worry about, and that's what surprised me. I didn't expect a machine to not be able to handle what I would assume is a very basic game. And that all comes down to how your programmers are programming things and understanding the systems and all that kind of stuff. So if you're thinking you're going to have an easy a walk in the park just because your game might not be a high fidelity type game, be prepared to face similar obstacles as anyone else making any game. And on the last note, I wanted to leave off on more of a positive thing. It's not necessarily something that I wish I knew. It's because it's not a negative, but making games is extremely fun. So I was not expecting to enjoy every aspect of making games. I love, when it comes to making movies, I love acting is really the only thing I really love to do. I do really have a passion for writing, but sometimes the system at which you have to adhere to when making a movie, especially if you're writing for other people or with other people, it can be draining and not as fun. It starts to feel like a job. I hate producing movies. I think producing movies is the worst job ever. I really don't usually enjoy editing for other people as well. So there's a lot of aspects about filmmaking that I don't enjoy, whereas when it comes to video games, I've enjoyed every second, every moment of it. I've loved producing, I've loved the marketing aspect, I've loved designing, I've loved the learning, directing, writing. Everything has been a blast, and I think that if you have any interest in these things, I definitely encourage anyone to try it out because it's extremely fun, and you almost have to be careful because there have been times and phases in my life where I'm getting so obsessed with it because I'm having so much fun that I forget to leave my house in the summer. Like I'm staying indoors. I never see the sun. I'm not seeing my friends because I really legitimately love doing it. It's hard to take me away from it because it feels like I don't need to take a vacation from it. It's just a very fun thing. I've become obsessed with it. I love it. But that can also be dangerous as well. But overall, I wanted to leave on that positive note of I was extremely surprised to find myself loving every aspect of making games. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, my hope is to be able to provide a little bit of insight for anyone who is thinking about making a game and to give you real, tangible advice that you can use and apply directly to your own personal journey through this. The most beneficial thing about this podcast is that I'm a regular person just like you. I had no ins, no helping hands. I didn't have a boatload of cash. So the things that I faced are most likely the same things you're going to face. And the outcome that I have with my game is most likely the same outcome you will experience. I post new episodes every week on patreon.com/CooperBibaud. So if you find these helpful and you want to show support, you can do that for just $1 a month. I do have an entire series planned that will take you through pre-production to post-production, but if you want to make sure I cover a specific topic or answer a personal question, that is available to patrons. But again, I do plan on being very thorough, so if you want to just catch these on YouTube or podcast services for free, you can do that. You'll most likely get the answers you're looking for. I appreciate every listener, no matter where they're listening from. Also new this week are some products I wanted to talk about that you might be interested in if you're listening to this podcast. Fair warning, this is a sponsor, #ad, whatever you need to know. But these are things that I get to choose. I got to select what I talk about here. So they're actually things that I've purchased myself and that I do enjoy. If you are interested in these products, the links are down below in the description. They're both books actually. One is Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. written by Jason Schreier. It's a very interesting book about the making of several different games. So if you wanted to follow along in the development cycle of a bunch of different projects from small games to big games, it's a really good book. I love it. If you're into that kind of stuff, which you probably are if you're listening to this, then I highly recommend that book. The second is Spelunky by Derek Yu. It's part of the Boss Fight books series. Those books can be hit or miss, but the Spelunky one is a masterpiece. I loved that book. Again, if you like game development stories or you just like being inspired by people's success, I highly recommend it. It's a really, really good book. There's also some links in there for anyone who is looking to shop for any upcoming holidays or gifts or that kind of thing. There are links for Nintendo eShop, PlayStation Store cards, or Xbox stores. So if you are going to buy some of those, it helps me out. It helps the podcast out. So if you are going to buy those things anyway, do so with the link below. It gives me some stuff, I think. I don't know how it works. I'm new to this whole thing. But if you're going to buy one, use those links. It helps me. It helps get some money for the show. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week.